All right, Brent, thank you so much for joining us today on the SALTovation Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, of course.
So, Ceretax isn't your first pass at software. How did you find yourself in the software space and more specifically sales tax? And where did you start to gain that foundation?
Yeah, I'm probably like most people. I don't know too many people who set out their life going, yeah, I want to go into sales tax. So there's always some kind of like event or something that pulls you in this direction. Even like people who go, oh, I want to be in accounting or something like that. I mean, it's never usually like, "Oh, I want to be in sales tax." So I'm going to say I found it by accident, and I'm going to blame it all on my partner, Mike. Mike's first job out of college was with a company called Atlantax, which is was a tax compliance firm. Way back in the day. After that, him and a partner started Tax Partners. I think that was in the late '90s, and him and I knew each other back then. Actually, our wives had their first jobs together out of college, so we were more, um, running around buddies than we were business partners. Um, and yeah, and so he started that company, and like I said, in the late '90s, and then I had started another company, and he exited that to I think they sold to Thomson Reuters in like
Yep.
2005. Um, and my company at that time was kind of taking off, and then around I want to say it was around 2009. He approached me with an idea, and I actually just exited the company I was with, or that I had started, and he had this great idea, and I said, "Well, I really don't know a lot about this, but I will surely learn, and I will also help. Obviously put it together and fund it." And so yeah, that's kind of how it started. And we founded Ceretax in 2010, and then partnered with Walters Kluwer at that particular point in time, who ended up acquiring us in 2015. So yeah, that's kind of my immediate background, immediate foray, I guess, into the industry. Like I said, kind of like a lot of folks, kind of by accident.
Mhm. But then 2015 is SureTax, and
Right.
then now we have Ceratax.
Yeah.
So where's that transition? It's
Oh yeah. I guess I
2025.
left
That's
that
10
out. Right.
years. What happened during those
Yeah.
10 years? I'd like
I,
to
I
know.
ge- yeah. I guess I left. I guess I left that out. So SureTax was great. I mean, it was a great run. And when we got acquired, I don't think we had any intention of ever, starting another one, quite frankly, at the time. But it just, you know, sales tax was moving quickly. It's moving quickly as a SaaS, and just Mike and I are kind of quick movers also, and we, didn't. I guess we didn't acclimate as well to that really large kind of bureaucratic type of company. And after a while, we were looking at other ways of doing things. We started getting calls from another number of folks in the industry, which led us to believe there was space still for another player that was nimble, agile, taking advantage of new technology. So we put our heads together and said, okay, well, can we? Who do we know out here in the space that we think are quote unquote the all star team of people that we've worked with in the past, not just with our company, but with some of the other players. And we started inquiring, and we were able to put together a pretty solid team that we felt were best and brightest. And so that was kind of when we decided to make the leap and do it
But
again.
but who is the team? Is that tech? Is that sales? Like
Yeah, it's all the
what is
above,
that?
right? Well,
Okay.
it was more tax and tech, right? Because I
Okay.
obviously I kind of explained my background, and you know, um, I never try to put myself off as the tax expert, resident tax expert here. But one of the key things that we have to have is I think all technology in this space has to be driven by tax experts. So for us, the kind of the key early people were, yes, the technology people for one, obviously. Uh, but really having the not just technology people, but technology people who also have the tax background. Because like you just build a
Mhm.
SaaS, any other kind of SaaS, it's not the same. I mean, until you've been in the space for a number of years, you really don't understand like the complexity of what you have to build because
Correct.
it's so interdependent on so many things. Unlike like if I just want to build I don't know, even a CRM. It's like you just kind of do it, right? You go, here's my vision. This is what I want to build, and you hire very intelligent technology people to get you where you want to go. But in tax, really, there's so many inner working parts of it especially obviously in indirect tax, that have dependencies that you don't want to just pull technology people and try to put it, kind of just draw it for them. They really have to understand, how everything works from the state level, district authorities, all the, units of measure and all. I mean, just all the interplays that you have with GIS and everything else, and you really kind of have to understand and have gone through some of the battles of bad implementations or really really complex kind of transformational type projects. I think in order to build a good foundation in the space. One of the things we thought why there was still room is that, that has to continue. That innovation has to continue. And you
Mhm.
can't constantly be paying for legacy technical debt that's out there that, granted, yeah, maybe it was a cloud-based system, but it wasn't really a cloud-based system. It was a hosted solution. So yeah, you are moving it into a data center, but you're not building it on true cloud-enabled tools, which is where you really get the efficiency, right? I mean, that's where you
Okay.
really can hyperscale. It's where you really like you could take advantage of these tools and the redundancy to eliminate downtime. So there's still a lot of that that's that we can do, because we're building on all new technology. But also, going back to what you were saying earlier is, now that the government has kind of crammed it down to where, you know, everyone has to comply, right? So before, like you said, you might have to be a 30, $40 million company to afford a 70,000, 80,000, or $200,000 implementation. But the $3 and $5 million a year guy, really wasn't held accountable. But now they are. Now they're
Correct.
super
Correct.
accountable. So you've got to provide a solution that, fits in that budget.
Hmm.
And is allowed, that also gives them that capability of connecting multiple devices, but or multiple
Address. Yeah.
platforms, but
Yep.
not just saying, okay, here's the connector, download the connector, and then here's a connector, download this connector, and they don't really talk to each other. You don't really know what's happening. And then the worst
Mhm.
part is you just can't get any support. So like you're sitting there with a bunch of connectors and you're like, okay, it's not, they're not talking to each other. Why? And you support ticket,
Correct.
2 weeks, support
Is
ticket,
the-
2 weeks, support ticket. And then you get one answer and then you work for another hour and it doesn't work. And then you get another answer and you work for an hour. And then you're 2 weeks at a time, you're waiting on answers. So what we try to do with our platform is just say, okay, how do I just most easily make this and enable this for everybody? So we've got APIs for just pulling data. We got APIs for just pulling rates, even like if you just
Mm.
to feed certain tables, we could using APIs, we could pull data from this system and this system, combine it, into one kind of source of truth, if you will, for reporting. So yeah, so the biggest thing was obviously we have connectors and we have to support those connectors, but making sure these connectors are supported in a way that if you run into problems, you have issues, I've got a whole team that's going to walk you through that, right? But then also have the API tools to say, okay, well, maybe that's not the most efficient route. Maybe we just want to connect an API to pull rates to feed this, and then over here though we want to pull reporting. So
Yeah.
there's it's just that's kind of just an approach, I guess. We took
Yeah.
when we even started down it. 'Cause I mean, Judy, I mean, it's like the space has been dominated for the most part by two major players. I mean, and there's
Mhm.
several others that maybe stay way up on the enterprise space. There's a bunch trying to enter now that are on the very kind of low end of the space, and they all serve a
Mhm.
very good purpose. But that tier from just above, hey, it's just widget times rate, which is fine. But to hey, I've got 3 sources of revenue. I've got 3,
Mhm.
places where I interact with my customer. I've got resellers. I've got divisions. I've got, product lines that span
Mhm.
multiple verticals. Once you kind of get into that space, but you're not the enterprise, tier,
Mhm.
you really only have had 2 options, before us. And yeah, we just felt like we could fill that niche between um, obviously service support, flexibility, but also, build it on all new technologies to where it's like just super efficient as far as cost goes. So
Right.
yeah.
We were very appreciative because you helped
Yeah.
integrate a very small company, but maybe 3 million in revenue a year, but still needed to comply.
Of
And it
course.
was
Yeah.
seamless for them. I mean, great feedback. They have built their own custom website. Everything is sort of custom. to their unique business and they were able to get integrated. That's huge for them, and for a much more reasonable price and some peace of mind and some hello, I answer the phone.
It's an interesting space for sure, and it doesn't seem to be getting any less interesting, if you will. It's kind of funny, when I talk to people or live around me and they say, "Oh, what do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, we have a sales tax automation platform." They're like, really?" Explain.
What is it?
And then again, like if you don't know, you just assume. Well, I mean, it's just like I go down to my local store and I buy something and it's just 7%, right? They don't
Right.
understand all the things that go into that 7% and how you need to report on that 7% and how it's not always 7%. And you just start talking to them about funny things like, oh, well, that straw in that drink may have a different taxability if they served it to you, with the Coke, or if you bought the straw in a box, or if you got it at a restaurant versus a gas station, things like that. And people
Yeah,
start to get, people first of all start to get really kind of like, what? Are you serious? And then they get kind of mad because they realize how many times they're getting taxed on things that are just invisible to them. Right. So,
totally.
but if you're a business owner, if you think about it, like that guy who's my neighbor that I just talked about, if you're that business owner, you know, and you don't know this stuff, but you're supposed to comply with it.
Hmm.
What? I mean,
Gotcha.
you know,
Yeah.
Well, and Brent, with your straw example, that goes back to what you said kind of at the very beginning of like anyone can build a software, but it's about really like what makes a difference. And from like a sales tax perspective, there are all of those laws that you've got to incorporate that your software platform can then, right, do it right. Because there's no point of integrating a sales tax software that doesn't work, right? It's the wrong rates, it's the wrong rules, and you can't rely on it. So, as you were building this platform, and we've probably touched on a couple of these things that you might address, but what are some of those factors that you had to consider when building a sales tax software?
I mean, that's limitless. And we're finding even now that like that's a never ending scope. Right. So, it will never change as long as the government keeps, making things more and more complicated. Uh, which I guess goes back into the question is like, what did you have to consider? And it's the fact that the government's never going to make things less complicated. So it's like, how do I make this software
That's fair.
flexible enough to just assume the unassumable, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, um, and it's so it goes two ways, right? Number one is obviously the technology. So making it so flexible to where it's not just like a rate change. Anybody captures a rate change, right? I mean, we've created AI tools. We've got a great staff of, in order to verify and collect, and we've got scrapers all over the place. So we're capturing those. And I'm proud to say, I have definitely a few examples that come from the last couple months where we caught things that the legacy providers didn't. And honestly, I think
Mhm.
it's just because we've built better kind of processes around it.
Yeah.
But it goes into also what we call our content model. So that's our research model, right? Um, so building a model to where it's like, okay, when something changes or, a different vertical becomes taxable, it wasn't taxable, whatever, it doesn't kind of break your whole system and it doesn't require you to build a module, right? That's where I
Okay.
think a lot of like the legacy providers also got killed is like, okay, well, we do this, and I think it's gonna also be a barrier for those lower entry products to try to go upstream. Because it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we do this basics. Well, if you don't anticipate really complex rule changes in your model, in your overall, then when you try to move to another vertical or something that changes or that's real complex, whether it's you're changing the taxability based on units of measure. All right. This happens a lot, like energy, communications, um, oil and gas, a lot of niche verticals, right? And some that we're not even seeing that are, obviously coming to the forefront, streaming, things like that. Those types of changes happen all the time. And if you haven't built your product and your model based on like super flex technology, that has to create that then creates either a whole nother module that you have to build, and then you have to connect the two modules, or that customer now has to have two modules, right? And this talks to one and this talks to another. So one of the things we had to take into consideration is as we're expanding into the universe of products, how do we make the product itself so flexible that as we enter into different markets or markets change, that it doesn't break the system because that's really disruptive to the client. Um,
Yeah.
Same thing though is how do we make it so flexible that if I'm connecting with multiple ERPs, and plus a custom and then an API, that I can do all of that without disrupting. I don't need three products. I don't need you know, the light product and then the POS product and the other product. I'm trying to connect all those, still going through kind of one central product. So that was one of the things that we thought really deeply about, but also, okay, well, there's just all this new technology out there. Why are we not using it to make sure there is no downtime, right? And then there's no volume, right? So, throttling, right? So it's like, again, you're talking about legacy technology where it's like, they built it a certain way and yes, it's gotten better and better. And, it's hosting us, but we're thinking of like, okay, Black Fridays, companies like we have companies that send us like call detail records, if you think about it like that. Like they're sending us millions of transactions. Well, I can't have his huge activity impacting this guy over here, especially like during reporting, right? So how do I do that to where I can hyperscale everything without interrupting anybody at any point in time, so that this guy over here who only runs 1,000 transactions, he's just as important because he's got to have his reports the same time everybody else does. So how do I make sure he can get his reports in an instant? But with this guy over here who's sending 30 million records today also needs his report. Like, how do I make sure I can do that without having any disruption? And so that's kind of like what we took into consideration. So I would say it's the content model, one, and then it's just using new technology. So there's no throttling, there's no downtime, there's no, no gap. So I would say those were the big things that we took into consideration.
Well, and I think also your telecom, oil and gas, and
So,
those specific industries are very complicated, much more
mhm,
complicated than a B2B or B2C goods company. Even SaaS is less complicated than oil and gas and telecom because there's so many different local fees and taxes and measurements that you really have to be thinking about, that not a lot of companies have that same issue. Like vaping is a new one too, where there's some
you know,
different excise taxes, and that's a new product, vaping, right?
well, and to be
So,
honest with you, like Judy, and you know this, I mean, because you do a lot of research. You're obviously
mhm,
the ins and outs of all this. Like take vaping or cannabis or something like that, right? We don't have a clue how they're going to do it yet. I
right.
mean, they're just starting, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's like I have to build a content model, um, to where like I have to anticipate being able to absorb any kind of like we don't know what they're going to. I mean, like they're just
right.
starting about this, but like we don't
Yeah.
we don't know how that's gonna shake out. And what we really have no insight into is like what local authorities do, right? Because
Oh my God, right? Well, I live in Colorado. We live in Colorado. So this is our
yeah,
life local. Yeah.
right, yeah, exactly. We see it, and especially like in the telecom space, where it's like, right,
Mhm.
a local jurisdiction,
Right. Right.
wants to raise some cash, and but they know better than to try to pass a tax that everybody kind of knows about. So
Uh-huh.
they'll put a fee on top. I mean,
Uh-huh.
a football stadium fee that's somehow attached to
Yeah,
communication service. It's like we've got to, and then all right, well, then is it based on the dollars? Is it based on the seats? Is it based on the connectivity? Is it what? And so
totally.
like you just have to be able to anticipate. Like when we said, we're like, all right, how do we build a platform? Like I said, that anticipates all these things, whereas before, um, what was cutting edge at the time, it's like we have to anticipate what's cutting edge today, but what will adapt to tomorrow. And I think that was some of the things that the legacy providers, even quite frankly, still struggle with, right?
What we've done a lot the last few years is we've gone through and fixed things that have been broken because they got audited, or they didn't add new tax rules when they added new products because they didn't know, and then they got audited. So people aren't watching this technology because they're not managing it within their own business. So there's a big disconnect between the very large multinational taxpayers of America and the small businesses that have to comply with the institutional knowledge to manage this tax issues.
Yeah, that's
So
actually,
there's a definite break there that I find ourselves to be in the middle of,
yeah.
where it's like, oh my gosh, you're a $3 to $6 million company and you're not doing this. That's
Well,
bad because
and
that's
it's
going to
worse
cost
for
you
them.
money.
Typical business margins are anywhere from 15 to 40%. If you're selling products, right? Sometimes they're higher, um, but if you've got a penalty because you haven't been doing, a sales tax, let's just use an average of
Yeah,
7%, right? And you haven't been doing it right for a couple of years. I mean, that's a huge. I mean, you're wiping out a year of profit potentially. I
totally.
mean,
Totally. And we
so
find
for
clients with
me,
millions of issues. It's
yeah,
very stressful for us.
yeah.
It's very sad. Yeah.
Well, and it's also these guys are the guys that move fast. Those are the guys that go like, okay, today I have an online store, but then tomorrow I'm also going to have a distribution channel,
Because I
right?
can.
And then
Yeah.
also I'm going to sell now, maybe, funny enough, maybe I do brick and mortar, backwards, right?
Mhm.
You go backwards, who knows? But those are the guys that like they move really fast in their business. And
Mhm.
they're the ones that kind of get trapped because they turn around and go, oh, I didn't realize that,
Correct.
you know, I mean, Wayfair's sort of old news, but it's still like it's just not in the top of mind because you got a company who's saying, "Hey, I sell whatever widget, right?" And then they kind of have a handle on things, but then they get a partner who's like, "Man, I love that, and I'm going to distribute that for you, and but we're going to do it this way," and they don't realize potentially how that impacted their nexus, right?
Correct.
Everywhere.
100%. Yep.
So I want to take a step back because we've been kind of throwing out some terms of like connectors and API focuses and what that all means. And kind of the way, Brent, you've expressed Ceretax, it's like you're flexible, you're nimble and can adapt. But when we're talking about connectors and we're talking about APIs, what does that mean from like a sales tax perspective for maybe some of our listeners who either don't live in this space, maybe they're an income tax person, but like, what does that mean when you're thinking about sales tax?
Well, I mean, connector API, what I mean, sometimes the terms are kind of used, ubiquitous, they're kind of the same, but I think of connectors more as like fixed points. And where it's like, all right, I built kind of a one line of communication right into this platform, and it's like it's there, and you just if I'm the customer, okay, I've got a connector to this system that sits over here. I just turn it on, and it's supposed to work, right? And then, but then I have another system that doesn't flow through this system. So what do I do over here, right? And so that's where if you think about it, the way I kind of think about it anyway, is like connectors are kind of more like one to one, whereas API is kind of like connect it all, right? So that's kind of the way I think about it. And even the connectors, like the early connectors are kind of built, and like I said, oh, it's over here and it's just supposed to work. It's like, okay, but what if? Like, what if yeah, it works for like 80% of what I'm doing, but for 20% it doesn't. Well, the connector itself, may not be built to say, okay, well, let's just adapt it. Let's just modify it, right? Let's just change it. So when I think about it that way, I'm thinking like, just being API driven on everything else is just sort of adds a layer of kind of connectivity across your entire base, but also your, into your custom workflows and into your in-house, um, homegrown solutions, and things of that nature. So it's like, I want to be able to support you with everything you've got. A custom website that you built in house, your custom, shopping cart, so that's kind of the kind of the way I look at it.